In reviewing the Giant Trance 27.5, I'm going to do something a little bit different than I typically do on my bike reviews. Normally I do one big review. This one I'm going to break up into a series of smaller reviews, kind of like a video log, based on a certain period of time of riding the bike. So I put in a week now on this bike, so I'm going to do my first review and call it week 1 aboard the Giant Trance 27.5. First, let me talk about how the bike rides. And I'll start off by saying this Trance is different than the older 26er Trances. I had a 26er Trance a few years ago, and those were a little bit more trail oriented and probably blended a little bit more into cross country. In fact, the one that I had 120 millimeters of travel front and rear. With this being a larger wheel size and being 140 millimeters of travel, this feels like a much more aggressive bike made for burlier trails. So I'm going to say that this bike is a lot more downhill focused than the older trail bike type Trances. For riding on my local trails, which have a little bit softer soils, and it's in Florida, so it's pretty flat, I'm going to say that this bike actually feels a little bit sluggish. Now, I've been on a cross-country bike for the past probably 4 months, and so being on a more aggressive trail bike, I would say the bike feels a little bit sluggish on the flats and especially on the uphills. And I think that's due to the bike being, about 30 pounds compared to a lightweight cross-country bike, and the tires being more aggressive. Now, I did not get this bike for riding in Florida, so it's not a big deal. And I noticed this when I had my rain. The rain also felt a little bit sluggish. However, when I got up into the mountains with the rain, it felt really good on the climbs and awesome on the downhills. So I'm not worried about this. What's fun about this bike is even for the shorter downhills that we have here, this bike absolutely comes alive when you push it hard on a downhill. You can really push hard on the corners and it holds a line really well. I'm going to say it holds a corner better than my Rain, and it feels almost as agile as my Rain. The tires have a lot to do with that, I think. The Schwalbe knobby nick tires, I'm loving these. I know some guys have said that sidewalls are a little bit weak and they wear down. Obviously, only being a week on the bike, I can't give any long-term report, but these are a really, really good gripping tire. We've had a lot of leaves on the trail, and even with the leaves on the trail, I'm able to just push this thing hard into the corners, and it goes into the corners quick and really holds it. So I am actually really impressed with the bike itself and also the tires. I had mentioned in my first look video on this bike that having a 32 millimeter stanchion fork may be a downer for some, but the fact that this fork is only 140 millimeters of travel and not 150 or 160, I think you can get away with a 32. It's definitely lighter, and so that's a plus. Like I've said before, I'm not that heavy, but I've really not noticed any flex in the fork. So I'm going to say after week 1 that I'm pretty happy with this fork. I generally leave it in the 140 millimeter travel setting. If this were a longer fork, I'd probably be dropping it down into the lower setting on the Talus. But for just general riding, I leave it in the 140 setting. I did ride out to the trails about 12 or 13 miles today and dropped it down, and but other than that, I just leave it in the 140 and it feels totally fine. Now, speaking of riding it on the road, this is not a fast bike on the road. I'll just say that right now. Again, I think it's the weight of the bike and the tires. So I'm going to say if you ride a lot on roads or dirt roads, that you're probably going to want to lean more towards an Anthem 27.5 or maybe even a 29er. But being the fact that this is a trail bike, you just put up with that, because again, when you get this thing on rough trails and especially downhills, it just comes alive. I'm reminded on this bike how good Maestro suspension is, and I'll probably mention this a few times in my series of reviews, that the Maestro suspension probably combines having a firm pedaling platform with also being plush better than just about any suspension type that I've ridden. I would say my Orbea has probably a little bit better square edge type absorption than the Maestro, but everything else I really like. Again, the pedaling platform and how plush it feels. The components work great. You know, SLX brakes are just a workhorse. They have really good power and modulation. Again, I've said this in my video reviews that Shimano brakes to me are the best that I ride, period. Whether it be SLX, XT, or XTR, I love the Shimano brakes, and these are no exception. They work really well. Shifting has been just spot on. I've only had to do one cable adjustment. I did that today, but it just shifts really nicely, crisply. You know, when you've got to drop it down into the smaller ring, it just drops right down there. No misshifts so far, so the components are working well. The cockpit, I love this cockpit setup, the 730 wide bar, and it's a 70 millimeter stem. I mentioned in the first overlook that the cockpit was spec'd well and it rides really well. The bike is really easy to throw around, and it's also pretty stable. So the cockpit has some play in that. So I really like the cockpit. I am a Giant fan, and I like what they put out, but I'm going to go off here for a few minutes on my biggest gripe on this bike, and I'll apologize in advance if it sounds like I'm whining, because I probably am. To me, this is a big deal. Some of you out there, it may not be a big deal, but I'm scratching my head, guys, on this one because I don't understand it. And that's the water bottle holder, or the placement of the water bottle bolts. This is a standard water bottle cage. This is a medium-sized frame, and if I try to put a normal water bottle in this bike, it does not fit. I'm seriously just don't understand this. And Giant, if you're watching this and you have an opening in your product design department, I'm going to give you my resume, because you guys have me baffled. You could drop the bolts down an inch and you still have plenty of clearance with the shock. This is the exact cage. I mean, literally, I took it off my rein, which was also a medium, and I had no issues. So it's not the fact that it's a medium. In fact, my son rides a 14.5-inch Giant hardtail, and he can fit a huge water bottle in his bike. I am absolutely baffled, and the reason this is a big deal is because when I head out on my epic rides, I put a bottle of concentrated sports drink because I don't want to put sports drink in my Camelback. And so I put a concentrated bottle of sports drink in my bike, and I put water in my Camelback, and that gives me a pretty good amount of fluid. It can get me through 3 or 4 hours of riding. And I also don't want to carry all of my water on my Camelback. So, you know, I'm going to try to find some cages that have the bolts down, you know, the placement where the cage might be lower. If that is not going to work, then, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do. In fact, it has me so baffled, I think I'm going to have my local shop contact Giant and just see if they screwed up on the bolt placement, because I absolutely don't get this. I've owned 2 reins, a Trance, and 3 or 4 different Anthems, and they've all been mediums, and I've never had a problem with the water bottle not fitting in the frame. Now, I will say this bike has excellent top tube clearance or standover height. You know, the top tube really drops down and it feels good. I mean, you can stand over the bike and you just have lots of room, and that's really good for lowering the center of gravity. But they could drop the bolts down an inch and the shock's going to be fine. So, you know, unfortunately, I have to end this review on this just baffling downer on the water bottle placement. So, and I'll also say I have not gotten the seat post warranted. You know, it's the holidays, so the Giant's closed right now, but as soon as they reopen, I'm going to warranty this seat post because, like I said, my initial first look at the bike, the seat post will not return. The pressure inside that cartridge is gone. So at least it will lock and I can ride the bike, so that's good. So that'll wrap up week 1 aboard the Giant Trance. The good, the bad, and the ugly on this bike. You know, overall, I have to say, as long as you don't need a water bottle, this is a really good riding bike. And it's probably one of the best riding trail bikes I've ridden to date. Unfortunately, I have the weight of a camelback on every ride. So, you know, we'll see how it goes with getting another water bottle holder, or maybe even contacting Giant and see if that's just a flaw. But I also didn't point out, I did put my my Ghetto chainstay protector because I like going the extra mile and really protecting that chainstay. So as I do on my other bikes, I took an old inner tube and wrapped it up and made my own Ghetto chainstay protector, so it's there. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and stay tuned. If you don't subscribe to my channel, go ahead and do so, and look for an updated review in a few weeks.